Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So, like the title suggests, we are going to be working with pixel art today, as pixel art's been kind of one of those things like I really wanted to do more of like a deep dive into, like actually learning, because I've always loved like retro games and just kind of like the pixel aesthetic. And I think I was recommended a video on YouTube where a person was doing like isometric kind of buildings for pixel art and stuff and working with a very limited palette. So I kind of wanted to dive back into doing more pixel art, and I'll pop in some examples of pixel art. By the way, I'm just doing kind of like a little test. This is not what we're going to be working on today, and we're going to be working on something a little bit different from how I usually work with pixel art, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit later. But I'll try to sprinkle in some of my old pixel artwork as well as ones that I've done for, let's say, for Carrot Day, and kind of like the different way how I approach those kind of drawings versus the ones I'm going to be doing today. So I'll put those up on screen, and we're going to be finishing up this tiny little Masaki before we're going to move on, because I just wanted to do a test before I become too rusty. So I kind of missed filming the first portion of this, so apologies about that. But basically, we're starting off kind of with the isometric kind of base block of everything. So my initial plan was actually to make Masaki's flower shop. Now, in kind of like the story that I have for Masaki in my head is that it's not actually owned by Masaki. He just works kind of like kind of part-time because he's a student as well, but he works part-time kind of for Koji's grandparents, and his grandparents are the ones who owned this flower shop. So I did kind of like a very rough mock-up on the bottom right-hand corner, and I probably should have looked up like proper reference to kind of map this out, because I think I wanted it to be more of an older building, kind of set off kind of like not in a very like city area, if that makes sense. I kind of wanted to be more in like rural kind of countryside-ish, kind of like on an offside road kind of thing near a bank of like where the river is and stuff. But because I didn't use proper references, I don't think it's going to depict that. But I feel like also I took a lot of the foliage out of the piece as well, because I didn't know how well I could execute doing pixel art for this type of drawing, if that makes sense. I don't draw buildings a lot, and I feel like I still need a lot of visual material, but I kind of wanted to jump right in and just start to work on this piece. So initially, when I started off with kind of like the base block of everything, I started to stack things higher and trying my best to make sure I kind of understood the perspective of it so that we could add in more objects. So I added in some signs, some boxes, containers, a watering can. I'm gonna add in the hose. And for my understanding, a lot of people do I think it's like 2 pixels kind of line going in either direction for the isometric type, and I just flipped, like I did one half and then flipped it and did the other half. I'm gonna have to adjust the roof a little bit later too. But usually when I do pixel art, it's very much, a lot of it is just me kind of messing around, especially a lot with the color, because a lot of the different kind of value shifts and color can help depict a lot of stuff for pixel art. So the canvas size, I probably should have mentioned earlier, is a 128 by 128 pixel size. And I feel like when I've worked with pixel art before, I tend to be in the 100 to 200 range anyways, but I don't think a lot about like the smaller details, kind of like trying to make it make sense in my brain. But I feel like because I'm working with a limited palette and I'm kind of working on kind of like smaller details, a lot of the individual pixels itself is going to matter a lot. But when I work on some other pieces, like the bonbongi piece I did for Carrot Day from this year, and I think last year I did pixels too. If not, it's 2 years ago. I might have done paper cut style for last year. So I think 2 years ago I did pixels for both of them, and I didn't care too much this year about keeping shapes looking correct and making sure like pixels are kind of even and kind of depicted in the right kind of way, so that we don't have any kind of like weird corners where there's like an excess pixel in a place and all that jazz. But the difference from that, how I used to work with like pixels, and now what I'm doing today is that I wanted to work with a limited color palette as well. So the video I remember watching last week, the person had like a specific kind of color palette. I don't remember roughly on the top of my head how many colors they had, but I decided to stick with 5 colors. So I changed my line work to a dark navy bluish color, and then we have a purple, kind of a turquoisey color-ish. I don't know how you would describe that color. Then we kind of have like a light orange, and then we have a very pale yellow. So that is kind of the colors I wanted to work with, because I think those colors would represent Masaki really well. And I'll kind of explain this when we get to the next drawing, because I'm going to be sticking with this color palette. So my main concern was that I wanted to keep my values pretty clear, but I was kind of scared of making things have too much contrast, which I'm going to run into that problem of not making the values too, like, how do I explain, clearly enough. Because in the 3rd session of me doing pixel art, we're going to run into that problem where I think there's 2 values that are too similar and they're kind of competing, if anything, rather than being able to balance each other out for different objects and stuff. So for this piece, once I did the initial kind of like shading, roughing in textures, adding all the details where I wanted, so like windows, we had like the shines, I have some shadow areas. I decided to try some dithering in some areas, I think. I'm not sure if we passed that point, but I might have like gotten rid of it because I don't think it looked nice. Adding in some clouds, adding in the background color, and I decided to change the line work color as well. So that's the thing, I kind of struggle with doing details with line work and doing details by just blocking in the shape itself. I know people work differently. Some people block in like the silhouette entirely and then flesh out the character or the object afterwards, because the silhouette's kind of important. Okay, let me explain this first. So because I'm working with 128 by 128 canvas, I wanted to resize it to 1080 by 1080, and you can do so by going to the image resolution and making sure that you select hard edges. I think it's like, I'll put a screenshot right here so you guys can know what option or thing you can select, so that when you resize it, it doesn't make it super blurry and you don't get kind of like those weird little faded pixels around each different pixel that you placed. So hopefully that will help anybody who wants to make more of a larger version of what they've done, because pixels, you're literally working with like such a tiny canvas that when you want to post to, let's say, Instagram or Twitter or anywhere that you post your images, those pictures would get blown out and get very fuzzy. So it's good to resize it properly and making sure that each pixel gets bigger with kind of like a hard edge, so that the pixels remain as squares even when they're resized to, let's say, 1080 by 1080. Okay, so we are working on the next session for the pixel art. So you can see that I have Masaki doodles. We're going to work on the small one on the upper right first. And I kind of wanted to treat it more like a portrait of Masaki, maybe potentially for a game or something. Granted that I don't think like a lot of games would have this many pixels for like a specific portrait, but I think it was still like, it would still be fun to do. So I kind of wanted to do kind of like a whole sheet of just Masaki. So I am going to be using the same color palette. I'm just arranging them so that I have easier access. So like I said, we have that kind of pale orangey yellow, we have an orange, we have that turquoise-ish color, a purple, and then kind of like a navy blue. So I'm going to apply that to Masaki. So I mentioned this earlier that I kind of struggle doing line work and figuring out how to keep them thin and make sense for certain objects. And I think some objects it works really well, but other ones I struggle by doing with line work is kind of the hair. And kind of like the reason why I struggle with doing the hair in this kind of like line art way is because oftentimes I like adding like hair strands and trying to separate different sections of the hair, and sometimes it gets a little bit too busy, so it's easier for me to slap in the base tone, add in the shadows and potentially any lines to kind of separate it, and then add in the highlights, and it just reads a lot more cleaner. So yeah, that's what I did for Masaki's hair. I decided to duplicate the borders, or like the little square, and then keep Masaki's name on the bottom, so it kind of treats it as like a maybe a character select screen or something. I thought it'd be nice to have like 2 chibi versions and then a non-chibi version. Initially I was gonna do like different expressions for him, but I didn't want to do too many repeating of the same structure too much, so that is what I'm going to be doing after we finish the full body of Masaki, or full body chibi of him. So I wanted to draw him kind of like as if he was in a, maybe like a farming game where he can collect like plants and like fruit or flowers or something like that. And kind of like similar to how I did the hair on the other one, I did the hair in the same method where I kind of blocked it in with that kind of like purpley color. And then for the plants and foliage, I also blocked it in by silhouetting it with the darkest color, because I didn't want to deal with doing the line work for the petals of the flowers that I wanted to do, which kind of look like peonies, kind of. At least I tried to make them look kind of like peonies. So you can see that I'm doing the leaves, and then I'm gonna try to add in some of the lighter colors, like my midtones, and then the greens and some of the orange to kind of pull out the leaves, or not the leaves, the petals of the flowers afterwards. And I think they read a lot better. So you can see me kind of like shaping it in. I decided to get rid of some of the line work in the middle, and then kind of just adding kind of like bits and bobs of like the darker color to kind of separate some of the areas. And then I tried my best to add in the green and the purple to push the shadows a little bit. And I think it kind of reads as flowers, hopefully, so probably a better method of doing this. Like I said, I never really did like a whole deep dive into pixel art, so this is like a lot of me kind of just messing around and seeing what I personally like. But for the most part, this color palette, because it suits Masaki very well, it was very easy for me to draw him and make the pixels make sense, at least for me, when I placed down the colors, because his hair is brown, his apron is brown, his shirt and is, I guess like his sweater and his pants are on the cooler side anyways, so made those the kind of that greenish turquoise color. And then everything else can be done with the orange or the yellows, like his skin tone, his boots, rim lighting, anything like that just works out really well. And I think just because the values were set at a good like contrast from one another, I think things just look a little bit more cohesive as well, because I'm able to use certain colors as the shade or like the shadow color for another one, so it's easy for me to kind of like mesh them around. So to finish off that Masaki, changed the line art color, and then we did some grass just to ground him, and we're going to be working on the bottom right Masaki, which kind of looks a little derpy because I don't think maybe if I sketched him out before putting the border, it would have been a little bit easier, but his hair is kind of like skewed to be pushed to the left a little bit, which kind of looks a little funny. I try my best to kind of correct it, but I think that's why it's easier for me to also do it with the silhouette kind of way. I also kind of struggled with his eyes a little bit, because I didn't know if I wanted to keep the simple highlight in the center or if I wanted to do like an actual pupil and a highlight. In the end, I decided to keep it with the light color in the center, because I think from far away it just reads more easily. So yeah, I think for the most part, the entire little spread of the canvas, I actually really like these ones, and I really like the color palette. But sadly, I think this is where I peaked with the color palette, because I do some reiterations of kind of like similar color palettes of this one for my next one, and I don't think it reads as nicely, so I'll let you guys be the judge of that if you would like to give advice about the color palette, because I know for me I wanted a little bit more contrast between my two midtones, and I did not do that, so that is something I'm going to be struggling with later. But here are the Masaki ones, and we're going to be moving on to kind of like a little bit of a larger one. You can see I was trying to play with the canvas size, and I kind of wanted to draw someone from Genshin Impact. And my reason for that is that I kind of wanted to see if I could kind of curate a color palette to the character, but also sticking with that minimal color palette to see if I can still depict the character. So I decided to pick Bennett from Genshin Impact because I know some people have gripes about his design, but I feel like because he has like a bunch of like bits and bobs of like kind of like random accessories kind of among his body, I think it would be kind of fun to do like the different objects and stuff. And I kind of wanted to do his goggles, if anything. So that is what we're going to be doing today. I'm just kind of posing Bennett like this. The canvas size that I decided to use was going to be doubled. So I was going to do 128 by is it 256? I can't do math, so I'll think about it later, but I was gonna double it and maybe do like a full body. I'm kind of glad I didn't, because it might be a little bit too ambitious for my noob self learning how to do pixel art. But I decided to go kind of with like a knee up version of Bennett, and I switched the canvas size to be, I believe, 128 by 200. So it's not quite doubled, but it is a lot longer so that we could fit in more Bennett. So for the most part, I am going to do line work for the majority of Bennett, minus the hair, of course. And I think some areas I am going to initially block in as very dark, because it's just easier for me to read. And he has some areas that are kind of like either a black or like a dark navy blue, but I feel like it reads a lot better if I just blocked them in as black. So for his hair, I did the same method, but I decided to take like a vibrant color so that I could see the silhouette of it more easily instead of seeing the black area like immediately on his face. So we're gonna kind of play around with the hair a little bit, because I run into a problem. I didn't realize that Bennett's hair is on the lighter side, and same with his skin tone. So I'm going to have to kind of push and pull and see if I can make sure that his hair and his skin doesn't meld into one weird blob. But I think I did like an okay job with his face. I feel like I just struggled with the rest of him because of my lack of contrast between my two mid-tone colors, which we'll get into a little bit later. So for the line work, so even though I was trying to be a little bit more mindful about the pixel placements for the isometric one and the ones I did of Masaki, so the two previous sessions, this one I was not too concerned about keeping things super clean. And you'll notice in the hair, there's like some places where it has like double pixels where I feel like it should have been just one, so that it looks thinner and a little bit more clean. This one I think I wanted to do the line work as quick as I could, fill in the colors, and then kind of finagle my way to try to make it make sense to me. Because for me, pixel art's fun to see what can be changed with just a few pixels, and for me it's hard to visualize without actually doing the actual like blocking in of the color, adding in that strip of pixels to see if it makes a good rim lighting or anything like that. So yeah, I just did the line work as quick as I could so that we could get into doing the actual color. I do like the fact that I blocked in a lot of the shadows with the black, because I think it absolutely like really helps kind of keep the contrast there. But I also apologize, I don't know if it's gonna flash super quickly, so do be a little wary if you're prone to flashing of color, that sometimes I switch colors really quickly for the background for this one, just because it was hard for me to settle with a color that I liked. So you can see me playing around with the values, and I didn't pay attention to my bottom color palette. I actually think maybe the middle color palette might have worked better, even though it looks a little bit more weird color picks, I guess, in terms of a color scheme. I think it might have worked better for the actual drawing of Bennett. So yeah, I tried my best to just block in colors to see whether or not I wanted certain objects to be, you know, maybe the mid-tone color. I also think, okay, my brain's like running on overdrive right now. The second color of that color palette, I think I could have went a little bit lighter, or I don't know, maybe a little bit warmer, because I feel like it had too much contrast with my lightest color, and then it was competing with the blue, but my blue was already competing with the purple I had. So you can see that I decided to go with purple for the background color, and I actually think I like this one the most. But later on you're going to see me that I'm going to change it to blue. I'm going to change it to, I think I'm going to change it to blue. I think I might change it back to purple and then change it to that reddish orange color. And I think I end up choosing the reddish orange color, but I still like the purple I think the most, just because the purple is actually not that prevalent in the rest of his color scheme, so it's not really competing as much. Yeah, I think I just mostly like his face, and then later on I like the way how I did the shorts, just because it's fun to color and kind of render a little bit of chunkier clothing, because you can really exaggerate the shadows and the highlights nicely. But yeah, here's kind of like me progressing with Bennett. The blue is a little bit too much now that it's in the background. I think it helps when I do the shorts a little bit with the shading with the purple, as well as adding a little bit of highlights and some clothing folds by adding in the orangey reddish orange, I don't know what color you want to call that, as well as the kind of like that pale flesh tone peach color. So yeah, that's kind of how I struggled with this one a little bit. I think it would be interesting to see if I can find or make some other color palettes for potentially just playing around doing some other pixel art, because like I said, usually when I do pixel art I don't limit my colors, which is why I wanted to try that kind of method today, just because it's good to do that if you're planning to do like a certain aesthetic, or even for like games and stuff. A cohesive color palette is definitely visually appealing, but for me it's like sometimes my brain just really likes making things look really smooth and soft, so I would add in a lot of like transitional colors. I would use the airbrush to see if I can like make a new mid-tone. So if I have like a dark color and a light color and I want a transition color, I would use like a airbrush and put the light color on top of the dark color, pick up the new kind of mid-tone color and use that as a way to transition my light color to my darker color. So yeah, I just like making things look a lot softer, which I don't really get that opportunity to do with this kind of color scheme, because 5 colors that are for the most part vastly different, you can't really get things to look super duper smooth, unless maybe you want to do dithering. But for me, I find dithering a little bit hard to apply appropriately, or at least for me. I know a lot of people can do it wonderfully and they can use it to transition things really nicely, but I definitely struggle with it. But here is the finished piece of Bennett. You guys can let me know what kind of background color you think actually suited him a little bit better. Yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's session of the pixel art that I did of kind of like the building and Masaki, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!